Bet the board.
What do you mean you don't bet? I mean, I don't bet. You know, I don't gamble. I don't. I never have, and I never will. Yeah, right. I'll bet you $20 I can get you gambling before the end of the day.
You owe me 15 grand, pal.
Pay him. Pay that man his money.
It's the Bet the Board podcast.
God likes me. He really, really likes me.
In the end, I wound up right back where I started. I could still pick winners, and I could still make money for all kinds of people back home. And why mess up a good thing?
Here's Payne Insider and Todd Furman.
Welcome into the Bet the Board podcast, powered by FanDuel Sportsbook. Time to put all the preseason prep in the rearview mirror as week one inches ever so close with college football kickoff slated for this Labor Day weekend. I'm your host, Todd Furman, joined as always by my esteemed colleague and co-host, Payne Insider. But again, this is the perfect time to remind you with football kicking off in earnest. FanDuel.com/bettheboard. Go ahead, take advantage of $1,000 free bets amongst a myriad of other great promotions with football underway. Sign up. $1,000, absolutely risk-free in states where it applies. Arizona, we're looking at you. Sports betting coming there September 9th, and all other states where FanDuel Sportsbook operates. Payne, I know you are an NFL guy through and through, but college football, especially with your boys playing under the bright lights in Tallahassee, has to get you a little bit excited for what's coming up this weekend.
I love college football. This is week one. I thought week 0 was pretty interesting. I'm a college football guy now.
Oh,
you've converted me.
I don't know if I'll quite go that far, but at least maybe we can see a little bit of light at the end of the tunnel. A handful of big games that we'll break down, maybe not in the same depth you guys have grown accustomed to. Wanted to cover a little bit more lay of the land with a lot of power programs, some fun matchups. But Payne, before we even get into college football, wanted to spend a few minutes on a kid who played college football last year and suddenly will be thrust into a starting role in a very prominent NFL franchise.
QB1, Mac Jones?
QB1, baby.
I feel a little vindicated here, I'm not going to lie. The guy who should have won the Heisman Trophy last year proved that he can start for an NFL franchise day one. I mean, listen, some of us are just football guys. You know, we're sitting here in our home offices with cut-off sweatshirt hoodies on, and me and Belichick are just vibing. We got the same wavelength going on here. Two great football minds. No, I mean, listen, this isn't surprising at all. Cam caught COVID to start camp, and it gave Mac Jones about a week head start to get precious reps. And everything that we have been hearing out of camp from New England was the more accurate quarterback, the quarterback that could throw receivers open, the quarterback that made quicker decisions, the quarterback that understood where the ball needed to go within the offense, all pointed to Mac Jones starting. And I don't want to get into this debate because you do kind of feel bad for Cam, although he was given an opportunity to go out and win the job. But at the end of the day, I think we know Cam's personality. So it's always going to come back to a lot of people on the internet this day and age be like, well, how can Cam not be in the league right now? How can he not be like a quarterback that's starting? Like, sure, maybe if the Colts roll the dice on him and need him for a few weeks, if Wentz isn't ready, or maybe if Houston wasn't trying to lose games, he'd be a slightly better option than Tyrod Taylor. But the reality is, if you're like the 28th or 29th best quarterback in the league, teams are going to look to replace you. And I think the question obviously comes, and I know we shot text messages the night before, it's like, if Mac Jones is named the starter, Cam is absolutely getting cut.
Yep.
Because he's probably not the guy that's going to show up 2 hours early helping Mac Jones prepare to be better that week. And there's a reason why less talented guys have been backups in the league for a while, because they're willing to hold the clipboard. They're willing to do everything to make the starter better. They're willing to do everything in their minimal reps that week to help the defense get better and give them looks that they'll see. And so Cam Newton's probably not that guy. He's probably going to be the guy that's trying to get the job back. He's probably going to be the guy sulking on the sidelines. Bill Belichick doesn't want to field questions on Wednesdays and Thursdays about the backup quarterback. And so that's why he's gone.
Do you think he makes a logical fit? I know the Dallas Cowboys have expressed a little bit of interest. Could you see him being a backup behind Dak Prescott? And when you talk, by the way, about veteran quarterbacks who make the starter better, that doesn't apply to backup quarterbacks trying to get the starting quarterback to kick 50-yard field goals for crypto, just FYI.
I don't know. Is Cam going to understand that Dak is just substantially better, and if he wants to be in this league, then he's got to be willing to be a backup? I don't know that answer. I mean, at this point, he's got all the money in the world. I'm not sure that's what he wants to do with his life. I'm not sure if he's going to transition to be a willing leader and help others. I don't know if that's going to be the case. Now, Dak Prescott, he knows is better than him, so the vibe may change. He may just want to collect paychecks and be involved in football. Who knows? But if they do pick up Cam, it tells you exactly what we discussed 4 or 5 weeks ago, that this injury that Dallas tried downplaying, that was no biggie, and we came out and said, hey, this isn't season threatening, but this is certainly more serious than Dallas is leading on. And so far, that's exactly what we're seeing. So if Cam does get signed there, it tells you that Dak might not be ready for week 1, but I don't know if that's a real thing.
Yeah, I mean, the only good thing is at least you have an orthopedist there working on Dak's shoulder, so he should be familiar with some of what's ailed Cam over the last couple seasons. But of course, we'll talk a little bit more about New England and their trajectory going forward to kick things off about a week from now when we preview NFL Week 1, but did feel that was one of the bigger storylines brewing, knowing how many Alabama fans out there do listen to this podcast on a weekly basis. We figured we would touch on not one, not two, but a trio of former members of the Crimson Tide slated to be QB1s, as you tweeted out yesterday, and saw it catch an awful lot of attention there. I thought it was an apropos picture, given everything that's taken place. But enough about the National Football League pain. It's time to talk a little college. And we have one of the perennial Blue Bloods getting things going on Thursday night with a conference road game nonetheless, where Ohio State will head up to the Twin Cities to take on the Minnesota Golden Gophers at Huntington Bank Stadium. CJ Stroud makes his highly anticipated debut. And you're looking at Ohio State, a 14-point road favorite at FanDuel Sportsbook. Total on this game sits at 63. The Gophers' last win over Ohio State in Minneapolis, well, it has to go all the way back to before you and I walk this earth in November of 1981. When you look at the Buckeyes, the last Big Ten loss they suffered was all the way back in 2018 against a Rondale Moore-led Purdue Boilermaker team. And Ryan Day, he's won 16 of the last 17 games against league foes, all by double digits, the lone exception coming against our beloved Hoosiers last year. But when you look at some of the dynamics in play for this game, of course, CJ Stroud is the headliner. Do we think Ryan Day opens up the playbook to attack a Minnesota Golden Gophers defense that it was downright porous a season ago?
I think that's what I'm interested to see is how Ryan Day manages CJ Stroud. And we know that Ryan Day's brilliant, and he's smart enough to know the best thing for a young quarterback isn't to baby him and hand the ball off on every single early down. So, I mean, I would expect Ryan Day to make sure Stroud gets his confidence early with rollouts and RPOs and a little play action, just easy, efficient football. You don't want CJ Stroud making his first road start in a hostile environment trying to move the chains on 2nd and 7 and 3rd and 6. In saying that, Ohio State has a real matchup advantage in the trenches. And I know they lost some guys on the interior from that O-line group that was just awesome last year, 6th in line yards. But the horses they have at tackle could be the best tandem in college football. The interior guys got some burn last year and are highly decorated. I don't think Joe Rossi's Minnesota defensive coordinator. To me, when I look at things, I don't think he solved the issues up front by landing a Clemson transfer in Niles Pickney, who wasn't even a starter. Now, I think he helps. He had the best run stop percentage in 2019 in the entire ACC among qualifiers, but I don't think he can do it all. And this is still a really young Gophers defense without a ton of talent. And I think Minnesota probably gets bullied and mauled up front here. And I think we talked about this. Like a couple years back, you lose 7 starters, 4 NFL draft picks from that 2019 defense. And then all of a sudden in 2020, they just couldn't stop a nosebleed. And we saw it out of the gates against a really bad Michigan offense. Minnesota finished outside the top 100 in defensive line yards, stuff rate, havoc rate. They only managed tackles for loss on 4% of opponent snaps, over 52% of runs graded successful against Minnesota. They allowed an explosive run rate of 15%. I mean, it was just horrific in terms of stopping the run. I mean, ball carriers, the first time they were contacted on average was 3.5 yards downfield.
You could hit those holes.
Minnesota defense.
You could pick up 5 yards to carry if that was the case.
Yes. And, put it all together, it's like it's a defense that was 116th in overall defensive EPA. I don't think that's fixed in one offseason. And this could be a shock to those Gopher defenders, because when I look at some of those metrics from last season that were just downright dreadful, they didn't actually face an offense inside the top 35 in efficiency. They avoided all of the Big Ten's best offenses in Indiana, Penn State, and Ohio State last year. So, I mean, we may get a game that's tight early as C.J. Stroud's trying to find himself. But I could see a situation where Ohio State's O-line eventually wears down the Gophers' front seven. And I haven't mentioned a Minnesota defense, Todd, that finished outside the top 110 in both passing success rate and explosive passing, trying to defend the likes of Olave and Wilson and Rutger. I don't know how they're going to do that.
Yeah, it doesn't really bode well for Minnesota defensively. I mean, you rattled off some of those metrics. The eye test told us all we needed to know as well. They were last in the conference in yards per play allowed, 121st in the FBS. They couldn't stop the run. Red zone defense was one of the areas where they performed the best, and they were still in the bottom half. The problem, Payne, for Minnesota, and I know we've seen money at least a little bit come in on the Gophers as home underdogs. Offensively, everything they do is built around running the football with Mo Ibrahim, and the reality of it is just trying to figure out how they're going to be able to actually move the ball on offense with a receiving core that leaves more questions than it does have answers.
Yeah, I mean, listen, from a pure power number perspective, if these teams played on a neutral, we'd make Ohio State minus 16.5 right now, just because I need to see what C.J. Stroud is before we bump the Buckeyes up. Their ceiling obviously can be substantially higher, though. And then you factor in home field advantage, what's going to be, I think, a real packed house here. I'd give Minnesota 3 for that, but 14's a key number. So I'm not dealing 13.5. My number would exactly be what Pinnacle's dealing right now, which is Ohio State minus 14, minus 05. And then all of a sudden you start to look at this on-field matchup, especially this side of the ball, and it's like, yikes. I mean, there is this perception still out there about PJ Fleck in Minnesota, and they have the same quarterback from that great 2019 run. But the reality is, we have Minnesota power rated as the 7th best team in the Big Ten coming into the year. This isn't 2019. Our power number and the matchup really differ here. And I think a lot of people know at this point, I am not a fan of Mike Sanford Jr., the Gophers OC. And the best attribute, as you alluded to, that Minnesota's offense has is relying on these like 5 ginormous linemen with 180 returning starts, the most experienced O-line in the country, and then one of the best Big Ten backs in Ibrahim. But this is a run-first team, 57% run last season. Their calling card and the way they're built is on the ground, but I don't know if they can bully Ohio State. I doubt they can consistently. And we're talking about a Buckeyes defense that lost one of the best defensive players in Chase Young last year and still managed to be 11th in line yards, 9th in stuff rate, 8th in rushing success rate allowed. And I know the linebacker core has got some questions and far younger than last season, but when you add 2 of the 3 best front 7 players in the 2021 recruiting class with Sawyer and JTT, I doubt there's going to be this precipitous decline. And the biggest question is if Ohio State just says F it, right? Like, forget about it. Like, we're just going to load the box. We're returning 7 of our 8 guys in the secondary. We feel comfortable letting those guys operate in coverage one-on-one outside. Can Tanner Morgan be able to keep Ohio State honest through the air with a really, really subpar receiver group? And we saw last year, like, what life was without Tyler Johnson and Rashad Bateman. Minnesota's passing game was horrific. It was one of the largest year-over-year declines. Gophers were 115th in EPA pass differential from 2019 to 2020. Only 12 other teams in college football saw a larger dip year-over-year in EPA per pass play than Minnesota. And then you look at even the games in which Bateman played last year. Tanner Morgan targeted him on over 50% of throws in those games. Who makes up for that? You know, the receiver group that we anticipated to be there's going to be a decline, but the guy that we said, hey, like, maybe he steps up, he's been there the last few years, was Chris Ottman-Bell. A few weeks ago, he suffered a lower body injury. I know the result of that led everyone to be ecstatic because it looked like it was a season-ending thing. That doesn't appear to be the case, but he hasn't practiced since. And reports from 4 days ago is he just started to do some running on the sides. That doesn't sound like a guy that's going to be close to 100% if he even plays at all tomorrow night. And the guys behind him, Jackson and Wright, 12 combined catches between the two. So I don't see Minnesota's offense doing much here. I could see a situation where, middle of the third quarter, Ohio State's around the number, up 2-3 scores and says like, hey, let's hand it off, grind it out, play some mistake-free football. Let's not put anything complex on film with Oregon on deck. Let's save the gold. And you kind of couple that with a 53% chance of rain at kick and some light winds. It does make sense to me, Todd, that this under got hit here at 66.
Nope, those are all the things kind of when you break this game down that make a ton of sense. All the factors contributing to some of the uncertainty and offensive question marks for both sides, arguably playing into defensive strengths, those things being relatively equal. But Thursday Night Pain will tell us a little bit more about a team that's got aspirations not just of a conference championship in Ohio State, but a national championship as well. I'm not sure some of their Big Ten brethren that'll be doing battle Saturday at Camp Randall can envision themselves being in the national championship chase, but it won't stop Wisconsin from trying to assert their dominance in the Big Ten West. And when you look at the number here, the Badgers will welcome in Penn State as a 5-point favorite at FanDuel Sportsbook. This total sits at 50. Both of these proud programs looking to bounce back from poor showings in 2020. The first time both programs finished unranked in the same season since 2012. We know how poorly Penn State started the season before they were able to get a little bit of momentum down the stretch. And when you talk about struggling offenses, I'm not sure those are strong enough words for what we saw from Wisconsin up until they righted the ship in their bowl game against Wake Forest.
Yeah, I mean, there's not a Power 5 unit that's required more tweaking and manual adjusting in our projections than Wisconsin's offense. And I know the guys that you speak with, and I know your feelings are a little bit higher on Wisconsin's offense than I am. And part of the preseason projections include prior year data, okay? That's just kind of how this works. And then as the current season moves on, you wait towards the most recent games and the older stuff is less relevant. But 2020 data, we've weighted less than any prior season since I've been betting, okay? So when I look at Wisconsin, I'm cognizant that they are not going to finish 111th in offensive EPA and only 38% of snaps are going to grade successful this year like last year. And, you have to make these manual adjustments because we saw Graham Mertz didn't get any spring ball last season. His receiver group was decimated by injury. The running back room was putrid. He dealt with a stint of COVID that landed him out almost 3 weeks. He had a shoulder injury to his throwing arm. But I'm also not comfortable making the manual adjustment and projecting Wisconsin to be a top 15 offense like others are. I'm only halfway comfortable with using Wisconsin as the 25th best offense, and I saw Bill Connolly came out, and I think his most recent projection had Wisconsin outside the top 30 to start the season. So I feel a little bit better about that area. Now, it's awesome. Mertz got the full offseason. He's healthy. Receivers are healthy. I saw Danny Davis is going to play. And then, you look at the running back room. I think that's improved. You have a 4-star Clemson transfer in Ches Malusi who's coming in. You got the redshirt freshman Jalen Berger who had a nice showing last year, and there's big potential there. I think you get an upgrade with Paul Chryst calling plays, but I still need to see it. And I think that's the big thing for me. But it's not like Penn State's defense doesn't have questions. And this is kind of the battle for me because our projections for Penn State's defense isn't remotely close to what I have seen floating around the internet. I mean, this defensive line, in my mind, could struggle. I am not sure how you're going to replace Jason Owe and Shaka Toney and Antonio Shelton. And now, arguably, the best returning defensive lineman you had, DC Isaac, suffered a season-ending injury a few weeks back. And this is a defense that finished 104th in standard down sack rate, 70th in havoc rate, 59th in stuff rate, 38th in line yards. They finished outside the top 50 in rushing success rate allowed. And the D-line only got substantially worse in my mind. And when I really started to dig into games this week, and I've spent some time on this one, everything has kind of signaled to me that Wisconsin's offensive line would be able to control this game. But if you are a diehard Wisconsin fan, you've probably been following this closely. And you see, in the middle of the month, August 14th, I believe it was, Logan Brown, the first 5-star Wisconsin recruit since 2012, went down with an injury. He was getting all the first-team reps at left tackle because Tyler Beach hadn't suited up for practice all fall due to a leg injury. Beach is listed as the starting left tackle this week. He's only had a handful of practices. Tanner Boderlini was battling for the right tackle job. He was receiving most of the reps in the middle of August. He was also injured. I mean, the offensive line has basically been bit by the injury bug this entire camp for Wisconsin. So that might not be as large of an advantage as I initially anticipated. If you go back to the Big Ten preview, Todd, I think I talked about this being the game I would watch multiple times because I have so many questions about both these units. My hope is that this side of the matchup doesn't end up being like this middling battle where both sides win a little bit, where I'm still left unsure of what both are, because that's really where I'm at right now. I mean, if you get Graham Mertz playing at a 5-star level, Wisconsin's going to probably win this game going away. And if the O-line is able to be cohesive despite all of the injuries this fall, Wisconsin's probably going to win this game going away. But those are still leaps of faith at this point for me.
There's no doubt about it. And you look at Wisconsin's offensive woes last season. Mertz came out, was outstanding in the season opener against Illinois, and never looked anything close to that the remainder of the season. Now, when you look at the other side of the ball, Payne, continuity hasn't exact.
I believe Illinois ended with like a pass defense that was outside the top 120.
Yeah, that's not.
Kind of explains that as well.
That's neither here nor there. I mean, we got to give the kid a little bit of credit that he didn't throw it to players wearing the wrong color jersey. But yes, that should definitely factor in. When you look at the other side of the ball, I mean, continuity has not been a friend of Penn State offensively. They're going to bring in another new offensive coordinator, this time in Mike Urich. But you look at Wisconsin, and when we talk about man crushes in college football, Wisconsin's defensive coordinator probably makes your totem pole, your Mount Rushmore, arguably in the top 5 of any coach at his position.
He's going to be reliant upon Sean Clifford, and I'm not sure that that's going to be the best thing here. I mean, when I look at Sean Clifford, I don't know what he is at this point. And he's going to probably need some help from the ground game. And Penn State's strength is supposed to be their running backs. But Wisconsin's defense, top 25 in returning production. And that production a season ago finished number 1 in EPA per rush allowed. Number 2 in rushing success rate defense. 6th in defensive line yards. It's going to be really tough sledding trying to run the ball here. So I think when I look at this, I'm just not sure what Sean Clifford's going to be able to do in terms of getting help on the ground. Some of those rush numbers offensively for Penn State were really inflated last year because Sean Clifford was using his legs. Having that added man in the box really, I think, helps disguise what a run game truly is. I mean, Clifford had 60 designed runs. You remove sacks, he was the team's leading rusher. So if PSU can't get the ground game going outside of Clifford, it puts everything on his shoulders. And you look at where Wisconsin is most vulnerable. It's over the top. They were 58th in explosive pass defense last year. The problem is Clifford didn't really show a willingness or a want to push the ball downfield. Might have been because of the early struggles. He was floating balls high and getting picked off. Only 9% of Clifford's passes traveled 20-plus yards last season. If Jim Leonard is going to play man, like the Badgers defense does at one of the highest rates in the country, Clifford's got to extend the ball down the field. Right, he's got to hit Jahan Dotson and others multiple times on explosives for Penn State to stay within this number. And the other way to beat man coverage is with play action. So the hope here is that like Mike Yurcich uses more play action than Penn State did last year. You are hoping that when he went and scouted his own team, when he got the job, that he uncovered that Sean Clifford is actually elite throwing with play action. It's like the one elite area that he's had when throwing the football. 75% adjusted completion percentage, 10.5 yards an attempt, no picks, and a 130 passer rating. When Clifford didn't use play action last season, passer rating was 76. Yards per attempt were a full 4 yards lower. I think you want to do that a little bit here. I think you want to sprinkle in some layered looks. And I think the other thing that play action is going to do here is make Sean Clifford not only more comfortable, but it should keep Jim Leonard honest, right? It should keep his defense a little bit disciplined because Leonard loves to blitz. 44% blitz rate last season. If you can disguise run and pass with play action, I don't think it allows Jim Leonard to just have a field day teeing off on you. Now, I think the big question here is Sean Clifford good enough to execute this plan? And I haven't heard anything glowing said about John Clifford recently or much this offseason. In fact, Todd, what I've been hearing and all the quotes that have been coming out of James Franklin's mouth in regard to quarterback play has been about the backup quarterback, Taquan Roberson. James Franklin basically came out this week and said, he's opened a lot of eyes in camp. We'd love to get him some reps where we can. Meaningful reps in games. Maybe I'm reading too far into things, but my radar went up hearing that, and it tells me that Sean Clifford hasn't been lighting the world on fire this offseason.
Well, and we know James Franklin was extremely unhappy with Clifford's play for stretches last year. I mean, he went to Will Levis quite a bit to kind of change things up. Levis no longer there, taking over as a starting quarterback at Kentucky, so it wouldn't shock me at all, given some of the impatience we've seen from Franklin with his offense. Not just offensive coordinators, but skill position talent as well if he elected to go to a backup should things start to go awry. From Big Ten country, Payne, we head to Atlanta, where Alabama goes to their home away from home at the Mercedes-Benz Stadium to take on the Miami Hurricanes. And we don't have to spend a ton of time on this game because I think we know what we're getting with Nick Saban, especially early on in seasons. But when you talk about numbers, this price opened as low as 14 at some shops during the summer. Numbers been bet out to 19.5, 20 at FanDuel Sportsbook. The totals come down as well, from 65 to 61.5. The Hurricanes preseason 14 in the Associated Press poll will be the second highest ranked opponent that Alabama has started the season with over the last 9 years. In 2017, they took on Florida State, 7.5 point favorites. They beat the Seminoles 24-7. And if you go back to 2011, you look at Alabama, the average spread in their season openers, well, they've been 21 point favorites. Their average margin of victory, 28 points per game. I know there are a ton of question marks swirling about Bryce Young, but Payne, it's impossible to ignore that this is the highest rated recruit Nick Saban has ever brought in at the quarterback position to Tuscaloosa.
I have questions as well. And I think that's the interesting matchup in this game when you have a young quarterback like Bryce Young and you have a defensive coordinator like Manny Diaz who took back defensive play calling duties after a really subpar last season. I'm interested what the game plan is. Like if you're going to face Alabama, this is probably the best time you could do that in game one of the season when Bama is replacing 5 offensive players selected in the first 24 picks of the draft, and they're replacing gobs of offensive assistants and offensive analysts, 8 in total. Now, Bama's offense is talented. There's just not a lot of proven production. Alabama's offense is going to regress this season. There's no way around that, and it's why we have Alabama right now, even though they are the top power-rated team by our ratings. They're still about 7 points lower than where they were last year. And this was just a really historic offense. And I think we touched on this a little bit on the preview podcast, but their offense was 20% better than the second best offense in the country in terms of EPA. 18% of offensive snaps were explosive. So Bama could really beat you in a multitude of ways. They had no problem methodically smashing you down to down, and they had no problem gashing you with big chunks. If I'm Manny Diaz, though, I'm devising a game plan here to make Bryce Young and that receiver group beat me. You have to take something away. I'm not letting Alabama chunk and gash me on the ground and not make a first-time starter under center beat me. That's the way I would approach this. The question becomes, though, even with Alabama replacing 3 offensive linemen and the real possibility of the projected starting right tackle, Kendall Randolph, not playing due to injury, I don't know if Miami has the horses in the front 7. Or if they can be disciplined enough. I mean, that was really where Miami was lacking last year. 85th in EPA per rush allowed. Barely inside the top 100 in explosive run defense and rushing success rate allowed. And I'm kind of close to this situation down here, Todd. And all of the reports I'm hearing out of Miami is the Hurricanes have had a really difficult time setting the edge defensively during fall camp. The linebacker group has issues. It doesn't shock me. You lose Jalen Phillips. You lose Quincy Roche, the 2 best defenders from that unit last year. Phillips was Miami's best run defender by a mile. Now, Manny's been shouting to the heavens that this defense is much faster than last season.
Do you like that?
Maybe going smaller.
Everywhere you read, that's all he's talked about. We're faster, we're more athletic. I'm going up. I've heard this before.
Yes, and it's he's moving safeties to linebackers, and maybe going smaller works against some ACC offenses. I don't know if it works against Bama. You also have to think about discipline. Like Manny wants his guys to be aggressive. There's this boom or bust element to his philosophy. He likes guys playing on the other side of the line of scrimmage. Even in a down year, that's one thing you have to give Miami's defense credit for. Top 10 in havoc rate, top 10 in tackles for loss. But we will see times where Miami loses their gap integrity against a very disciplined Bama front. If Miami can't take the runaway, it's going to be a very long day. If they can't take the runaway and force Bryce Young to operate in second and long and third and medium, it could get ugly. And I think, as you kind of alluded to at the top, the spread is pretty telling here. In my mind, it indicates Miami doesn't have much of a chance. I thought 17 was probably the right number looking at our core ratings. It's continuing to tick up, and that's with all signs pointing to De'Aaron King playing. And that was something we were unsure of when we did our ACC preview a couple months back. You just wonder if at what point and at what number resistance might actually come here.
You'd have to think at 21 there would be some buyback if it got that high just out of principle, but clearly not a side that I'm running to the window to back by any stretch. When you look at Miami a season ago, 3 losses, they were outscored 49-3 in the first quarter against North Carolina, Clemson, and Oklahoma State. You go through Miami's resume, so to speak. Who was their season-defining win against? NC State, Pittsburgh? I mean, those were the only wins they had over teams with a winning record. And for the Canes defense, I hope Manny Diaz has more speed in place, because the lasting image I have of Miami defensively a season ago was giving up 772 yards against North Carolina that had dynamic playmakers they got into space. Don't think that will be lost on what you're going to see from Alabama offensively in the season opener. But while that campaign may be an appetizer, this one is clearly the main course in Charlotte, where the Georgia Bulldogs and Clemson will do battle, a pair of top 5 teams coming into the season. And you've seen this number ping pong all over the place. Clemson now a 3-point favorite at FanDuel Sportsbook, total down in that 50.5, 51 range. Number did get as high as 4.5 at some shops this summer. When we talk about Georgia, we know about the 5-star recruits. We know how Kirby Smart has upgraded the overall profile of this program from a talent standpoint. We saw JT Daniels on full display when he finally took over the reins late in the season, throwing the ball all over the yard, giving Georgia fans hope and optimism that this offense could be a lot more dynamic in 2021 than what they've grown accustomed to. Meanwhile, on the other side for Clemson, we saw DJ, albeit in a limited sample size, go on the road in South Bend and perform exceptionally well. He gets his number 1 running mate back in Justin Ross, so we were unsure when we previewed the ACC if he was going to be available this season. So much star power for both of these teams, but it's hard for me to ignore, Payne, when I break this down. One coach has taken that talent and gotten them to a better place. One coach, despite everything he's done to resurrect a program, still has a lot to prove, and I think all of our listeners know which 2 coaches I'm referring to in those particular regards.
Yeah, let's start with Georgia's offense, and I think it really comes down to if they are able to protect JT Daniels. It's still a really inexperienced O-line that had some troubles at times last year. 26% pressure rate allowed, 73rd in passing down sack rate allowed, and I think that's kind of the matchup, because when you get a Clemson defense that's led by Brent Venables, he's going to want to light you up. He's going to want to send blitz, 39% blitz rate last season, and then on third down, and that is a key down to watch in this matchup, Brent Venables eclipsed a 55% blitz rate in some games on that down. And Clemson's D-line is thought to be one of the best in the entire country. But what is interesting, if the Dogs can protect up front, some of the things that Todd Monken's offense does naturally are actually the way you beat a Venables defense. By at least design Georgia's offense with their crossing routes and some of the things they do in the passing game, having receivers sit down in the middle of the field past the linebacker and before the safeties. That kind of stuff has hurt Clemson in the past. When you look at the ground game, inside zone runs have hurt Clemson. Those are really the 3 things that have made Venables' defense look human when they've stepped up in class the last couple games, right? I mean, we've seen Ohio State pound them a little bit with some of these concepts. And again, by design, Monken's offense does these things. And you look at Georgia last season, inside zone runs, they averaged 5.5 yards a carry, 54% success rate. More than 11% of those inside zone runs went for 10 or more yards. When you have this aggressive front like Clemson is, sometimes you can hit them when their ears are pinned back and they're just trying to get upfield. I also think there's things Venables and Clemson might not have seen on tape. I mean, Todd Monken said this offseason only about 40% of his offense could actually be used last year between COVID and the revolving door of quarterbacks. JT Daniels at least provided a spark, And I think now that you've had a full offseason, we're going to see some things that no one has seen to this point. And JT Daniels is clearly their best option. His accuracy was fantastic. It was substantially better than either Spencer Bennett or Mathis last year. And then you dig into JT Daniels specifically on some of these concepts that have hurt Clemson in the past. The crossers, the slants. Last year, he had an adjusted accuracy of 81% on those throws and a 12.7 ADOT. So it becomes really interesting there. And if Clemson decides to get overly aggressive like they do at times in blitz, JT Daniels has to make them pay with passes over the top, with explosives. And that was an area where he was very good last year as well. On throws of 20 or more yards, passer rating of 117, had an 18% explosive pass rate, average depth of target 12.7 yards. He does want to take these kill shots, and you are going to have to take a couple of those and keep Clemson honest. Now, if Clemson gets pressure with their front four, this game's over. And it stinks we won't get to see Georgia's offense at its best with both their 5-star tight ends. Eric Gilbert was allowed to go back home. He's dealing with some personal things. Darnell Washington is the other 5-star tight end. He looks to be out for this game with, I believe, a foot injury. So not having the ability at times to have a 2 tight end set, to have both of those tight ends on the field at the same time and disguise things better, that could hurt. But if Georgia holds up in the trenches, a lot of what Todd Monken likes to do could give Venables some issues here. And there's also one thing, Todd, here before I kick it back, which is interesting to me. There's kind of a game within the game going on. De'Aaron Kendrick, the former Clemson defensive back that transferred to Georgia in June, obviously is projected to be a starting corner on defense. But his largest contribution might actually come on this side of the ball because he's probably going to get the Dogs prepared offensively for what Clemson wants to do defensively, what certain looks mean. I know Clemson coaches have been asked about this ad nauseum over the last 10 days or so, and they've come out and said, hey, this might hinder us a little bit. We've had to change some calls. We've had to change some looks because of this. So something to think about there with kind of the game within the game.
You know, it's always so interesting, too, when you look at this Georgia team, and we've talked about it at great length. Sometimes the best coaches have to realize what they know and what they don't know. You've seen Nick Saban kind of relinquish control of his offense over the last couple of years and pay dividends, whether it was Lane Kiffin, whether it was Steve Sarkisian, and Alabama was able to burst into the 21st century. I think Kirby's going to have to go through that progression as well and kind of go, you know what, I'm the CEO, but I'm more than happy to delegate responsibility and let Todd Monken do what he wants to do with the offensive personnel. You mentioned some of the injuries, and Georgia's had a lot of key guys actually miss time so far in fall camp at the receiver position. So I'm interested to see what that continuity looks like if JT Daniels on the same page with everybody. Now, on the other side, Payne, I mean, this Georgia front seven defensively should be outstanding. The problem for the Bulldogs, they don't have a whole lot of experience, if any, as far as their secondary is concerned, matched up against the Clemson offense and DJ Ungolele, who now obviously takes over the reins for Trevor Lawrence. You're not just in there as everyone's favorite man in the stadium as a backup quarterback, but you have to go out there and be the man with an NFL caliber wideout in Justin Ross. Will Clemson have the wherewithal and be able to hold up in the trenches on this side that allow their vertical passing game to flourish against an unproven Georgia secondary?
You went full last name. I like that.
I don't even know if I pronounced it right, though.
Week one.
You know us around, when it comes to things around here, we just try and get it phonetically right because inevitably the passionate fans that listen to this podcast and know their teams inside and out are going to do everything they can to correct us. And honestly, I encourage them to do so. It keeps us grounded. It keeps us humble, and call us morons as many times as humanly possible if we butcher pronunciations of your favorite players.
The very best college football team sites on the roster page has this little icon you can hover over that gives the pronunciation. Not all schools do that. I've looked. I was going to start using this, and it doesn't happen. You mentioned the front seven for Georgia. And I think that is probably the biggest question that Clemson has offensively is the O-line. Is that front seven going to be too overwhelming for Clemson's O-line? And Dabo has kind of come out and said, hey, I want to be positionless, and the best 5 offensive linemen are going to start here. But there's been a ton of moving parts. And it's also going to be a really undersized O-line from all indications. So you do wonder if Georgia can kind of bully Clemson at the point of attack. And just looking at things, my gut says Clemson could be pretty one-dimensional and reliant upon DJ in the passing game. We saw this dip last year, which we outlined, but it's worth mentioning again from the ACC preview, and it was Clemson's O-line went from 1st to 51st in line yards year over year. So the push up front just was not there last year. Travis Etienne at times was really frustrated because in 2019, the good O-line that they had, the first contact point for Etienne was 2.7 yards downfield. In 2020, the first contact point was 1.7 yards downfield on average. Clemson hasn't named a starter at running back. It sounds like it could be a committee. I'm hearing the true freshman Will Shipley is apparently so talented he's going to have a large role in this offense. Maybe he assists the O-line. We know DJ can use his mobility really well and create that extra man advantage in the box. But again, it comes back to something we mentioned on the ACC preview. What's the backup quarterback situation, and is it so bleak that they're not going to run DJ on these designed runs as much this year? And that could hinder Clemson's ground game. Georgia's D-line is one of the best in the country. They play extremely disciplined. Players know their assignments. They keep their gap integrity. Georgia was top 20 in rushing success rate defense, number 1 in explosive run defense. So, to me, if Clemson's going to have success offensively, it's got to be through the air. The O-line looks like it could hold up better in pass protection based on size and athleticism. And again, what I am hearing, that Clemson could be better in pass protection. Georgia, as you alluded to at the top, could be a little vulnerable in the secondary. There is some gamesmanship going on where Kirby and Dabo aren't releasing depth charts, and then when they finally did, it's the one from spring. Georgia's likely going to have 2 new starting corners. And when you do look at EPA per pass allowed and passing success rate allowed and explosive passing allowed, that was Georgia's weakness last season. It wasn't like horrific, but all those metrics outside the top 35. To me, this is going to be on DJ's shoulders. And what's interesting here is my understanding is he hasn't looked as good as most thought he would. I mean, this is a 5-star kid that was on fire last year when he was kind of called upon. 2 of the 3 best offensive performances and overall efficiency last year came with DJ starting, not Trevor Lawrence. But so far in camp, the word is DJ hasn't put together solid scrimmage numbers. He hasn't had a single wow day, and he's been battling accuracy issues. Now, some guys just aren't practice players. Some guys perform better when the lights come on. Hopefully that's the case, because if Clemson is going to keep this game tight, I think it has to be on DJ's shoulder.
One thing, too, I did find interesting, some of the comments coming out of Clemson's camp. They talked about Georgia and how deep they are along the defensive line. So Clemson has kind of indicated that they want to use some tempo to try and keep Georgia from rolling those fresh guys in. They've talked about wanting to push the pace a little bit. I'm not sure we're going to see that right out of the gates, but it could bear watching as far as a live total bet is concerned or something along those lines to keep Georgia from getting 6 to 8 guys out there with regular snaps on the defensive line, knowing that's been one of the areas of strength through recruiting. But like you talked about, that's great in theory, but it's hard to move the chains and burn clock offensively if your quarterback hasn't been overly accurate. So we'll see what we get from DJ early on. As far as this numbers concerned, Payne, have you seen anything on it? I mean, I know the hooks have largely disappeared from the market. We've seen a touch of under money hit the screen, but any of the guys you talk to making a case for one side or another?
I have not seen anything yet. My understanding was that Clemson was going to be the side, and then some of the reports that I kind of mentioned there about some offensive struggles led my guys to kind of stay off the game, but clearly when this reached 3.5, someone was interested in Georgia.
This, for me, has all the makings, not just of a heavyweight battle, because I think regardless of who comes out of this game with a win on their resume, their opponent that comes up on the short end of the stick will have plenty of opportunities to get themselves right back in the thick of things as far as the college football playoff is considered. And we talked about it previewing the ACC. After this game for Clemson, it is pretty much smooth sailing going forward. So this would go a long way in defining the Tiger season before they get into the pillow fight that could be a lot of their ACC opponents. Intersectional showdown, Payne, in one of the nightcaps as we head out west.
What?
Intersectional.
Okay.
I want to make sure I said it the right way. I mean, I butcher player pronunciations, but I at least hope my vocabulary is okay more often than not, although that might be giving myself a little too much credit.
No, I think you broke up, and I just heard the latter part of that word, and it just kind of threw me off.
Well, there may be plenty of that, too, when LSU fans get out to California, so we aren't quite sure. First off, obviously, to all those LSU fans, the student-athletes, and everybody else that's been affected, we hope families are healthy and safe. We know that obviously takes priority over football, and LSU has had their practice schedule completely disrupted given the aftermath of Hurricane Ida, and I'm sure it'll preclude a lot of those folks from making the trip to the Rose Bowl that they had circled on their calendar, knowing it's the first time the program has ever gone west to play in that historic venue. But as far as what's going to take place on the football field, you're looking at LSU, a field goal favorite. Total in this game at 65 against UCLA. Those numbers, of course, courtesy of FanDuel Sportsbook. And when you begin to go through what these two teams are this season, we've obviously seen a glorified dress rehearsal for UCLA, a game where they covered with ease against Hawaii last weekend, built a 24-3 lead after the first quarter, and pretty much took their foot off their gas. Michigan fans all over wondering, how come we never saw that? Zach Charbonnet with 6 carries, 3 touchdowns, and more than 100 yards. Michigan fans at least can be a little bit understanding when you realize it's Hawaii's defense. As we dig into LSU, Miles Brennan, he was expected to be their starting quarterback. A broken arm with a fishing accident, which sounds rather fishy to say the least when he's fished his entire life, but that's neither here nor there. So Max Johnson will be the guy. Max Johnson in 2 games last year went into Gainesville and led LSU to a massive upset against Florida and wowed us all with a 50-plus point performance against Ole Miss at Tiger Stadium. I guess the first question I have for you on this game, Payne, advantage or disadvantage that UCLA now has 60 full minutes of live action under their belt, but they've also had to put some things on film for LSU to prepare for?
Yeah, I think that's ultimately the great question here that we might not have answers to, because coming into last season, we assumed and had seen in the past that the team that got live bullets played in real game action, you would have thought had an advantage. That did not happen last year, and it was the team that sat out and had a chance to look at film that actually performed substantially better. And so it was a small sample size, but it is something to consider. And, you know, when you do look at LSU offensively, I think there is a little bit of a downgrade here at quarterback. Miles Brennan was someone that I think intrigued a lot of people. Now, Max Johnson's no slouch. You mentioned that he started the final 2 games last year, went 2-0. But when you actually look at some of the things that matter, the metrics, Brennan was the better quarterback in just about every category, from adjusted accuracy to EPA per pass attempt to passer rating, you name it. And I think what LSU might miss here is Brennan's ability to push the ball downfield accurately. And that was something that was really surprising to me, because you watch him and he was pretty impressive, but you just didn't really get the full scope of things until I dug into some of the numbers. Brennan was actually number 1 in the SEC in depth adjusted accuracy, while also having the deepest average depth of target. Being the most accurate while also pushing the ball the deepest down the field doesn't typically go hand in hand. You're willing to sacrifice some level of accuracy to take the deep shot. And so that's really impressive to me. And when you do look at UCLA defensively and where they were solid last year, is that 4-2-5 defense did kind of prevent the big play. They were 11th in explosive rate allowed. So just based on UCLA's defensive style and Brennan being out, it puts a lot of pressure, I think, on Max Johnson to be efficient down to down and methodically move the ball downfield. The weapons aren't great. I mean, Keyshawn Boutte is going to be a monster, and he's going to step up here in a big way. He's a true number 1 receiver, but I think there's question marks past him with the receiver group. LSU does return 4 or 5 starters along the O-line. Their projected starter at left tackle, Dare Rosenthal, decided to transfer out. I think they'll be okay. Cam Wire has kind of impressed guys. He looks to be the starter there. It's a pretty veteran group. They're not elite, and I think maybe some continuity and some experience maybe has this unit bump up from above average to probably pretty good. I'd expect a 2-back system. It sounds like whether it's Davis Price or Emery, neither of them have really emerged as the lead back. They need to figure out, I think, how to get more explosiveness from those 2 guys. LSU's 120th a year ago in explosive run offense. That's just not going to cut it when you're recruiting like 4 and 5-star guys. UCLA did struggle in that area last year, so that is something to watch for. 119th in rushing success rate allowed, 98th in stuff rate, 99th in line yards. So UCLA could be handled at the point of attack a little bit. Now, that's where it comes into play with your question at the top, Todd. It's like, which UCLA defense are we getting? The one from last year that got bullied in the trenches, or the one that dominated last week and stuffed 27% of runs at her behind the line of scrimmage? I would expect also some level of creativity from UCLA's defense that we might not have seen last week. There just wasn't a need to do anything crazy against a Hawaii offense that was, battling some things outside of football. We did project coming into the year that UCLA's defense would improve with 10 guys back. And there is this like feast or famine element to their defense where they want to blitz. I believe they were the 7th highest blitz rate in the country last year at 51%. So I would expect actually a more aggressive Bruins defense, something that they probably didn't have to put on film last year. But they did. They got out of the gate strong. It's tough to figure out how to factor that in. And, they held Hawaii to 4 yards per play last week, 33% success rate. And they just dominated in the trenches, 1.6 line yards allowed. I think they improved. I just don't think they improved to that level, but we're going to find out pretty quickly what that defensive front is.
Are you ready to officially start drinking the DTR Kool-Aid? Because when I dug into this game, I'm not going to lie. I was blown away when I went back and looked at his recruiting class that he was a part of and realized that a kid that was locally, and I probably should have known more about him, obviously, having played at Bishop Gorman. He was 4th behind Trevor Lawrence, Justin Fields, and the aforementioned JT Daniels. UCLA fans don't feel like they have the 4th-rated quarterback in that class, but when you look at DTR, he'll make some throws that really wow you. He'll show some flash plays with his legs that go, okay, this guy's got what it takes as a dual-threat quarterback, and then he'll make some throws like we saw early on against Hawaii last week and go, what the hell is going on? That ball wasn't even the same zip code as his wide receivers.
I think that's what he is at this point. What is this? Year 3 or 4? He is what he is. And I do believe that we have seen incremental improvement from DTR each year. And there was really, I thought, a huge leap offensively from UCLA last year that was mostly predicated on his improvement. And that's kind of the part that interests us when it comes to UCLA. And it's clear that we might have been ahead of the market. When you start to dig into some of the metrics, it was like UCLA was the 4th best team in the country in EPA differential, and yet they finished with a losing record. They improved 2.1 yards per play net year over year, and it was just really not winning close games. And that's been something that Chip Kelly has struggled with. 4 losses by a combined 15 points last year, but all of the metrics offensively looked pretty good. They go out and just hand Hawaii their ass. They averaged almost half a point per play offensively. Most of the damage, as you alluded to, was on the ground, which isn't surprising. They returned 5 guys along the O-line. They were able to just bully Hawaii at the point of attack. But really lackluster performance from DTR. And I know we touched on this in the preview podcast, and the part of his game that he really struggles with is the inability to process quickly. And sometimes the game moves too fast for him. And it's led to struggles under pressure. He's never had a passer rating above 61 when pressured in his 3 years at UCLA. And in game 1 against Hawaii, when you're facing inferior competition, DTR finished with a 39 passer rating when pressured on his dropbacks in game 1. And you can say, like, F it, right? We can just hand the ball off to beat Hawaii and run it down their throats. But you're going to need DTR's arm to be a threat this week and anytime you step up in class. And it's not just DTR, right? Like, I like Kyle Phillips, fantastic slot receiver. Greg Dulcich, one of the most impossible tight ends to cover at this level. But there's question marks about who can consistently win on the outside, and maybe that's partly why DTR isn't the best. And we know LSU's corners are going to be really good, and they're going to test that potential. And I fully expect an improved defense from LSU. I like the defensive coordinator hire for once. And We've seen Durante Jones. He spent time with Dave Aranda at Wisconsin. So a lot of those former LSU defensive principles that we saw under Aranda probably are coming back this year. Coach O said he wants to be more hands-on defensively. I don't know if that's a positive, but maybe motivational, right? Rah, let's get him going. And so, like, when I look at LSU's defense, this is one of the largest throwaways when it came to carrying over and factoring in 2020 data. We literally just like threw it out. There is just far too much talent outside at the corner position. I mean, you got 2 NFL caliber corners, and somehow LSU's 129th in explosive pass defense. Like, it's just impossible for that to happen again. LSU's allowed 52% of runs to great successful, and the entire defensive line returns. Like, I don't think those are things you could see. Players did not like Bo Pelini or his system. The energy and effort, a lot of games were non-existent. You don't want to say that young kids quit, but many of them did. And you had players come out and talk about how much they disliked Pelini and that they had no clue what the hell they were doing. So, I think that is something to factor in. Now, I think the other interesting thing to think about here is that when you are looking at a defense like LSU's, and things might go awry early in this game as they potentially try to catch up to speed, is this going to be like, oh shit moment, here we go again, we're just not that good? Or if they get punched in the mouth, are they going to be able to rebound here? And that's the big question to me when I look at LSU, because they have to, I think, play with confidence early. And I do think that they're going to be relied on a little bit more here now when you factor in Max Johnson at quarterback and not Miles Brennan.
Yeah, it's such an interesting team because you're right. When you talk about what 2020 was for them defensively, I don't think you put a whole lot of stock in it. You dig into some of those numbers and they're rather staggering. I'm not quite sure how LSU gives up 14 plays of 50-plus yards, 126 in the FBS, and for those scoring at home, there were only 127 teams, I believe, and all 127 didn't even play last year. And then you talk about the 2 NFL caliber corners in Derek Stingley Jr. and Eli Ricks being the other guy. Stingley was targeted 30 times. And Payne, I'm not even sure I believe this stat and how it's possible. A guy gets targeted 30 times and has 6 interceptions. I mean, just simply staggering to show you what he can do for a program known to produce elite level defensive backs. This, for me, honestly, maybe not because of the impact it can have in a national championship race, because unlike some that think LSU can be a bit of a dark horse, I don't believe in that. I think UCLA may, if things break the right way, have a chance to be relevant within the Pac-12. But as far as 2 programs that have question marks, whether it's Ed O restoring his legacy or Chip Kelly trying to erase what's essentially been a 19-44 record the last 63 games he's been a head coach at various levels, I think both these programs need a win to try and get their fan bases behind them. And one other thing, let me tell you, UCLA reported 32,900 fans in attendance for their season opener. That may have been 329 fans when they showed us the aerial shot at the Rose Bowl. Let's see if the baby blue and gold show out a little bit better for this game to kind of drown out some of the purple and gold that'll inevitably be making the trip to the West Coast.
I do want to say this. You were right. I was wrong. I bought into the hype that everyone on the West Coast kind of been locked inside for 18 months and that they were going to come out, be outside, enjoy the weather, show support. There was talks about all of these innovative things that the stadium was going to be doing that had interactive elements so fans could enjoy the experience more. And you're spot on. If they said there were 32,000 fans in attendance there, I would guess maybe 10% actually showed up. I mean, it was bare. And so that'll be the interesting element here to see if they actually come out. But my feeling is UCLA won't have much of a home field advantage here. We'll see. But I was completely wrong there. I was hoping that fans showed out here. And
one thing, honestly, let me tell you, having been there, and I haven't been to a lot of high-profile college football venues. I did have a chance to go to a Rose Bowl between USC and Michigan back, 2005 or thereabouts. Seeing a game at the Rose Bowl with the San Gabriel Mountains and everything might be one of the more picturesque stadium setups that you can have. But getting to that place for a game is an absolute bitch. So I can understand why UCLA fans don't turn out in droves for teams that have perennially been 6-6, 7-5. We'll see if Chip Kelly can start to instill them with some enthusiasm, because if they don't turn out for this game, I don't think they're going to turn up for many games within the Pac-12 schedule later on in the campaign. But from the Saturday slate into Sunday, Payne, I know a game that will have you on the edge of your seat. You'll turn off all of your technology so you can give your undivided attention to what will unfold Sunday night under the lights at Doak Campbell Stadium when your beloved Florida State Seminoles welcome in the Notre Dame Fighting Irish. And you're looking at Notre Dame, a touchdown road favorite at FanDuel Sportsbook. Total sits at 55. And before we get into some of the X's and O's in this game, you want to talk about a number that can't make up its mind? This is the poster child for a point spread that started as low as Notre Dame, a 6-point favorite, ballooned out to as many as the Irish laying 11. Now we've settled into right around that touchdown range.
So this is a really fun number, and we'll lay some context here, is that back in March, I spoke with a monster Notre Dame fan. I don't know if he wants his name mentioned, so I won't mention it. And me being the Florida State guy, we chopped it up on the phone for like 45 minutes, and we both came to the conclusion that this should probably be in the dead zone, right? 8.5. Florida State's probably going to have one of the largest home field advantages week one. And then all of a sudden, the game dipped from 8.5 to 6. Sharp money laid it with Notre Dame. And then when we recorded the ACC podcast, you said the number was 11. And I don't know what happened. Maybe I forgot about the game for a couple days. I didn't look at that specific game on the screen since it was lower down the board. And you said 11. I said, what are you talking about? And sure as shit, it was 11, a couple 11.5 some places. And I specifically said, like, that number is not going to last. And so here we are. The number didn't last at 11.5. We're now at, like, let's call it 7.1 or 7.2. It's really interesting to see potentially where this game could close. But I feel like this probably is a game that should be in the dead zone, 8.5. And I would just let things figure themselves out from there. I think 6 is probably a bad number. I think 11.5 is probably a bad number.
When you dig into the matchup that we're going to see on the field, we know the Irish, a little bit of a changing of the guard. Ian Book has been the fixture under center for the Irish over the last couple seasons. In comes Wisconsin transfer Jack Cohn, who I don't think either of us believe is nearly as dynamic a runner. And that was such a key part of what you saw from the Fighting Irish offensively. We know a little bit about what Notre Dame will bring to the table on their offensive line, where Jarrett Patterson is the lone returner. I mean, these road graders have paved the way for a underrated rushing attack and allowed Ian Book to operate, oftentimes without being under duress. We know the Irish want to use multiple tight end sets. They're going to be a lot of pulling linemen. It's a quick, easy passing game. In your opinion, does Florida State's overall upgrade from a defensive talent standpoint have some of the pieces and playmakers to disrupt what Notre Dame's going to want to do on that side of the ball?
I think that's the biggest question, is can FSU hold up in the trenches, or is Notre Dame just going to bully them and out-physical Florida State at the point of attack? And if it doesn't happen early, will it eventually happen as FSU wears down due to a lack of depth? I mean, the first 5 for Florida State ain't bad along the defensive line. You got Jermaine Johnson, the Georgia transfer, Keir Thomas, the South Carolina transfer, and then you have Lovett, Cooper, and Briggs rotating on the inside. The problem is I still don't trust FSU's linebackers, and it's clear the staff doesn't either. It's why we saw the transition to a 4-2-5 late last year, and that's how they're going to start this season. And traditionally, that's not the formation that works best when you're the smaller team playing the bigger, more physical team. But as you kind of alluded to, Notre Dame did lose 4 of 5 offensive linemen from last year's group, and in a year where it seems like every team in the country returns gobs of starters, Notre Dame does not. 123rd in returning offensive production. You mentioned Jack Cohn. He did win the job. I think he can be an efficient game manager. All signs point to him being extremely accurate in fall camp. But he's not Ian Book or anywhere close, not by the metrics. I mean, Cohn's career ADOT is roughly 1.5 yards lower than Book's. And the last time we saw Cohn as a full-time starter in 2019, his EPA per pass attempt was much lower than Ian Book's was last year. And then you factor in the run element. Cohn is not remotely close to the runner Ian Book was. We made almost a 4-point downgrade of Notre Dame year over year, and the vast majority of that is because of the departures on the offense. Now, The matchup advantage, aside from the physicality that Notre Dame has, is the tight ends. Florida State has not been able to cover a tight end since I think I was 9 years old. And so, there is some hype surrounding Kalen DeLoach and his ability to cover. He's a really undersized linebacker, but he's speedy. We saw FSU move Akeem Dent from corner to safety. He's had a resurgence. I mean, he was an uber-talented guy, 5-star guy, just didn't pan out at corner. Norvell moved him to safety, and he's bought in, and he could be the difference maker. And you obviously brought in Jamie Robinson as your slot corner safety from South Carolina. Maybe those three guys improve FSU's ability to defend tight ends. But the Michael Mayer and the George Takis combination, that scares the hell out of me. We saw last year FSU's 3 linebackers that played the most snaps allowed a 104 passer rating or worse in coverage. I'm also interested to see 2 other things defensively that are kind of bigger picture, and it's Adam Fuller's defense. What does it look like? Does it actually operate in unison? Because last year there were times where the front 7 was doing something completely opposite the coverage group should have been doing, and vice versa. And the second thing is, if FSU gets punched in the mouth early, how are they going to respond? Is it going to be, a similar situation to LSU where it's like, holy shit, here we go again. We actually suck. Us having success in camp is really just because our offense isn't very good. And those are like the questions. But I do think the defense is just completely revamped. It's not elite talent that they brought in the transfer market, but it is guys that are veterans that have a mental presence about them that are, I think, an upgrade somewhat talent-wise, but this isn't going to be an elite unit by any stretch. The other thing to think about here, and I kind of hit at the top again, is the home field advantage. This is going to be the largest home field advantage of the entire Week 1 slate. And it's really important, and we're probably going too far down the wormhole, but this could be the program-changing victory.
Wow.
Because
he said it. He said it. I'm marking this down. Hold on.
No. Let's keep it in context and let me finish here.
Okay.
I didn't mean that they're going to go out there and win this game. But if they do, it is program changing because right now you have a top 10 recruiting class after 3 wins. And when I tell you the recruits that are going to be at this game, it's just gobs of 4- and 5-star guys. And this is going to be them in this environment, in a packed house, and suddenly everything that you've been selling as a recruiter saying, hey, we just want to get to 6-6. That's our Super Bowl this year, 6-6 in a bowl game. But if you can show this marked improvement and actually beat Notre Dame with those kids in attendance who love the atmosphere, that can change everything.
Hey, every now and again, a program needs that win. Like you said, a proud program to kind of show that they're back on the uptick. Florida State's experienced a couple of down years. A lot of optimism, not only that I hear from you, but also reading in terms of the way Mike Norvell is gradually changing the culture. Last season dealt an unfortunate hand with the COVID situation, no on-campus recruiting visits, and a variety of other things that were working against the Seminole rebuild, knowing it's going to take a little while to get to Clemson's level as far as ACC relevance. Now, for me, Payne, when I look at this game, I think the most intriguing matchup will be on the other side of the ball with Notre Dame's defense matched up against Florida State's offense. We'll get to Florida State's quarterback conundrum in just a second, but the Irish, of course, bring in arguably the number 1 defensive coordinator in all of college football as far as hot names were concerned in Marcus Freeman. Brian Kelly made some comments he claims were taken out of context about Marcus Freeman maybe being the coach in waiting in South Bend. Kelly seemed to backpedal a little bit and say that Freeman will be the next black head coach to be out there if you read what he said earlier this week. When you look at this Irish defense, Kyle Hamilton is the name to know. He is the game breaker in the secondary. Whoever's under center for Florida State's going to need to identify him in every pre-snap read. A reason to believe that what Clark Lee started to build, Marcus Freeman will only build upon. Now, as far as what Kenny Dillingham is going to do on the offensive side, will it be Mackenzie Milton? Will it be Jordan Travis? Will it be a combination of 2? Or is Charlie Ward going to be walking through that door to take snaps as Florida State's starting quarterback?
Charlie Ward is not going to be under center. Here's kind of what I can say to this is back in March, I alluded to Jordan Travis being ahead of Mackenzie Milton in this quarterback battle, which Didn't shock anybody. He's been in the system. He was actually healthy. And then all of a sudden, towards the end of spring ball, Mackenzie Milton came on a little bit, had a great spring game performance. All the rumors of him being a gamer and not doing overly well in practice kind of showed itself in the spring game. He went back home to Hawaii. He was working out, continuing to rehab and learning the system. We just assumed, coming back to fall camp, that this was going to be Mackenzie Milton's job. He's had some rest days because the workload got to be too much. I mean, this is a guy who almost lost his leg. And so Jordan Travis, everything that I have heard, has been the better quarterback. And last year when he was dealing with an arm injury in camp, couldn't really throw it. I don't think he's going to be an elite thrower by any stretch, but all signs point to him being a substantially improved passer. And it's not like Florida State has the greatest O-line and the best receiver group that would be enabling him to look like $1 million throwing the ball.
There's no Peter Warrick in that room?
No. There is improvement from him. Now, you also don't know what Mike Norvell's going to do. I've said from day one, you shouldn't tell anybody who is going to start under center until the first snap.
Fuck no.
Because you didn't want either of these guys to get pissed off and transfer out. You didn't want to tip your hand because they are so diametrically opposed to what they're doing, right? Mackenzie Milton's the guy who's going to sit in shotgun, deliver the ball, release it quickly, and be accurate. And then you have Jordan Travis, who was really responsible for the improved run numbers last year with that added man in the box. And if he is an improved passer, then you've probably struck some level of gold. But I don't think we're going to find out who starts. I think both will get reps in this game. We know Mike Norvell was strongest last year with his offensive scripts. So if you have the ability to deliver a great script, march the ball down the field, then all of a sudden you go to a different quarterback and then you transition to the other guy again. Maybe that's the element of surprise that keeps Notre Dame on its heels early in this game. But that's one thing that we saw last year is, past the script, past the opening few drives, all of a sudden things started to settle in and defenses just swarmed. And I think that is the big element to this game, is seeing Florida State potentially operate on early downs. Can they be in third and manageable situations? Can they be in second and manageable situations? If Florida State does not win on early downs, this game potentially gets ugly because Florida State's one of the worst teams in the country. And even though the offensive line has improved year over year, if you get Florida State's offense in known passing situations, you are going to be able to dominate them and make quick work of the offense. So that is really what's scary here. The other thing is, when I dug into last year's game, and again, I mentioned this, I believe, we downgraded Notre Dame 4 points from last season. We've upgraded FSU roughly 6 points. But when you look at last season's box, FSU didn't have a win probability at any point in that game that indicated they should have only lost by 16. So the gap might actually be larger than we think. And in that game, Tamarian Terry had 9 catches for 146 and a touchdown. Now, he certainly underachieved in his career at Florida State, but the talent you couldn't debate. And right now, there isn't a guy outside for Florida State that's to his level talent-wise. The hope is that the entire offseason, the chemistry that's been built, the familiarity with the system, kind of has the sum of the parts being better than last year, and that's the hope. But it's going to be tough sledding here early on. I'm really interested to see what Mike Norvell has. Again, this is a big game for them. It's still a long road to the top. This is a 5 or 6 win football team. 6 in a bowl win is absolutely hitting the jackpot this year, and it's a Super Bowl-like season.
Further to kind of support what you've said, I found some of the comments and quotes. I watched way too many pressers with Coach Norvell and Kenny Dillingham, who I texted you jokingly that I really wanted to buy in. And if I was
make you want to get out there.
Yeah, it makes me want to get out there. Now, I'd take one hit and I'd be in a body bag broken into 7,000 pieces against a real caliber athlete. But as far as Dillingham,
I have noticed you've become a better human, though, over the last couple days. That might be after the Norvell motivational speech.
well, when you start at ground zero, it's not hard to become a better human. So let's leave it at that. But Kenny Dillingham, talked about exactly what you outlined there. So he was really excited about the wide receiver depth that's been developed, the players more suited to fill defined roles. But what I found even more staggering than that, he said they went from just teaching verbiage last season as their focus to now actually trying to coach football with these players. So they won't have to think so much out there. They'll be able to go out there and let their athleticism take over. And as far as the quarterback room was concerned, this is a direct quote from Norvell. I'm really excited about the quarterback room and the competition that we have, the versatility of skill sets that these guys bring. We're always going to explore each opportunity of how we can put our playmakers in position to shine in a variety of different ways. I'm excited about that room and what they bring to the offense. Again, further supporting what you said, and I think all of us believe should be the case. There's no reason to tip your hand. Make a defensive coordinator as talented and as sharp as Marcus Freeman. Prepare for two guys that offer very different skill sets, and then figure out who's got the hot hand with design packages and everything else. Do everything you can as far as subterfuge is concerned and misdirection to keep that Irish defense off balance.
Yeah, without question. And, you might get to a point in the game where you're going to need to rely on Jordan Travis's legs. And that's one thing that we saw last year was Florida State was substantially better with that extra man advantage in pass blocking. This is a top 20 team in line yards. It was shocking to all of us, but again, I think a lot of that was because of Jordan Travis's legs creating that extra man in the box. You also, that's the part that actually scares me, though, is when you dig into some of the numbers and you remove like garbage time. Florida State's metrics actually get a little bit worse, substantially worse, actually. So it's like I'm not quite sure how close they are, and it becomes this battle of knowing there's not a ton of great talent offensively, but what does having an entire offseason, getting familiar with the offense and the play calls, in the verbiage, having more things added to the fold, as you alluded to, from Norvell and Dillingham. That's what's going to be interesting to see, because the talent still isn't there, right? Your best receiver talent-wise is a true freshman early enrollee, Malik McLean from IMG Academy. There's not true difference makers in the receiver group. There's not a true difference maker at tight end. The offensive line, you're hoping, under Coach Atkins, who is one of the hottest names in college football, both recruiting and teaching technique, that he's improved the offensive line, but there's not great talent there. So again, your hope is if you can be below average, that's a big upgrade, especially when you factor in pass protection. If this is a unit that somehow becomes average or below average in pass protection and known passing situations, then we'll probably see a little bit of an offensive surge from FSU. But that is the one thing on this side of the ball that you have to watch for, because if Florida State's operating in 3rd and 6 and 7 and longer than that, going to be a long night offensively.
Hey, I'm going to be honest with you. I got the house to myself. Sunday, I'll have the Southern 500 up on one screen watching my beloved NASCAR in the first round of the playoffs. I just want to be able to watch a football game that's competitive from start to finish and not have to turn off after the first quarter. So,
fingers crossed. Fingers crossed.
Place
is going to be electric, though.
That's what you want to see, and I think that's honestly one of the things I'm most excited about, not just in the case of Florida State, but across the country this weekend, to see full stadiums again, to see that home field advantage that we love to build into our numbers, and see the passion and pageantry that goes into a college football weekend, especially around Labor Day, one of the longest standing traditions out there. Encourage you guys to follow Payne on Twitter at Payne Insider. I'm Todd Furman. You, of course, can follow me there. But again, most importantly, for all the big announcements and the big reveal that'll be coming next week, do follow the podcast at Bet the Board Pod. Also, FanDuel.com/BetTheBoard. Take advantage of all new user signups. If you can't remember exactly how to do that, we have the links. They're embedded in the podcast post no matter where you will download this fine program. Encourage you to make sure that you add FanDuel to your arsenal this football season. And Payne, for the first time in 2021 as far as college football is concerned. We have a bevy of win totals already in our portfolio, but we get the chance to make a short-term investment for week 1. I know it's a little bit more difficult sometimes since these numbers have been on the board. You and I have taken positions on a number of games with prices that are no longer available. But as far as the numbers that haven't moved too much, what direction do we send our loyal listeners in so they can cash their first college football ticket of the season?
We've talked about 3 games this morning. I will let you pick the game that we are going to give out. I believe we came down to 210. Was that correct?
Oh, now you're going to make me pull up the odds screen and make sure that I don't go into a diatribe.
South Alabama.
All right. Well, no, it wasn't going to take me a second or two. I mean, I have the screen here on my desktop. I just wanted to make sure. There's a lot of things I commit to memory, but the betting index numbers for a college football slate aren't one of those things this early in the year. But yes, the South Alabama Jaguars, and I know paying all of our listeners, I can hear them recoiling in disgust, going, wait, we waited an hour plus in the first college football podcast of the season. You can't give us Georgia-Clemson. You can't give us Big Ten showdowns. No. We're going to the Sun Belt, and we're backing South Alabama, who brings in Utah and South Carolina transfer quarterback in Jake Bentley, a brand new head coach in Kane Womack, who everyone has said the right things about. And this was a game plan that I had on my radar and was a little bit concerned given everything around Hurricane Ida. But fortunately for those folks in Mobile, they said they canceled practice on Monday, but there wasn't a disruption in terms of their normal game schedule the way it was concerned. This is a team who's got an extremely favorable schedule out of the gates and a chance to build some optimism. Maybe a hidden gem as far as the Sun Belt's concerned and fertile recruiting ground if you get the right head coach there. Steve Campbell, the program had grown stale. And they take on an opponent in Southern Miss who's led by a veteran quarterback in Jack Abraham, but I'm not quite sure what they are. They brought in a number of transfers from some other programs, but this was a team that took on water late in the season, didn't have an identity. And while the number, you could have had South Alabama as a 1.5 point dog, I don't think we've lost a lot of value at this point with the Jaguars, a modest 1-point favorite. So in a slate where a lot of these numbers have grown stale or volatile, however you want to try and spin it, I think this is the best available price that's out there. In 2 schools that we probably won't talk, we won't talk about in great detail week in, week out in this podcast, but it won't stop us from trying to make money in a game involving the 2 of them.
Yeah, it's very possible that we don't discuss these teams ever again past this. And there is a little bit movement on this game, but it was across 0. And if you do shop around, which we encourage you to do, you can lay 1 -05. You can lay -110 on the money line at a couple of places. So really shop around and do your due diligence. But we like South Alabama here this week.
That's our first best bet. You guys don't come listen to us for nothing. We'll break down all the biggest games, but that oftentimes isn't where you can find the best value in college football. Week 2, though, typically one of those weeks where you'll see some more overreactions and ample opportunities to jump on numbers that'll be up for 6 days instead of 6 months, creating an avenue, an area where we can find some investments. So first college football podcast, Payne, officially in the books. We only have, 16 more of these to go that you can dread every Wednesday from now until early December?
Listen, I had a fun time. We had some week 1 woes with recording. I don't know whether it was your service, my service. We lost touch for about 7 minutes in this thing. We had some dogs barking. It was the first college football podcast of the season. We got the hiccups out of the way, moving forward efficiently.
Yeah,
Love it.
See the nice part with
college football season is here.
The nice part with the mute button and this fancy technology, you hear the dogs, but our listeners may never actually get to hear Joplin on our podcast this season. But like they say all the time, it was real, it was fun. Hopefully Payne thought it was real fun. May have been somewhere in the middle. But either way, folks, get to the window. 210, as Payne said, -1, -05, the South Alabama Jaguars. It comes Saturday afternoon into the early evening. We'll see you at the window.
Thanks for listening to Bet the Board. You can catch Todd and Payne every Monday, Wednesday, and Thursday during football season, breaking down the biggest NFL and college football games. And to make sure you don't miss any free best bets, subscribe to Bet the Board on iTunes, Google Play, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts.